Hey everyone, Phobos here coming out with another build guide, and this is going to be another iteration of the Tri-Incinerate Totem build that you've seen before on the channel. It uses the Cheiftan like the other build does, but the main difference is that this build is centered around stacking ignites to do massive single target damage. And if I had to compare the two builds, I would say that the previous build is a bit more tankier than this build, but this build does a lot more damage across pretty much all scenarios. You don't really get the ignite stacking effect on the trash, obviously, but it still clears trash really fast, and it really destroys those problematic rares or like essence mobs or anything like that. So I would say you can't really feel the difference on trash that much, and it's a much bigger improvement on DPS in terms of bosses and really difficult rare mobs. So that's why I prefer this over the other version. So let's get right into the gearing choices, I guess. Now, obviously, we're gonna have to use an Ember Wake here, right? Because it's the only thing that lets you stack ignites, lets you stack up to 300 ignites, and you deal 80% less burning damage. But obviously, you're stacking so many ignites that you easily make that up. And then your critical strikes do not deal extra critical damage. This is not a problem because we're not applying ignite with crit. We're applying it with essentially just chance to ignite and using Incinerate, which casts really fast. So we get a ton of ignites and we're not critting anyway, so we don't need the extra damage on the critical strikes. The next item for this build that I'd say is pretty important is a Soul Mantle. You don't need to use a Soul Mantle, but it increases your damage by a ton, and it basically provides, or it does three main things that I want to go over for this build, right? So and these aren't really in an order of importance. They are all kind of important in their own way. So the first thing it does is it gives you an extra totem. Now, an extra totem is great in itself, right? Not that useful on trash, but great on bosses. But in this case, it's giving you even more ignites, right? So it's not just like you're getting the flat tooltip value of the totem um, added again for having another totem. You're getting the ignite value of another totem, which is huge because when you sim this, it sims like 500k to 600k ignites, right? With like kind of shitty gear, I would say, or like just decent gear. So having another totem applying that type of ignite damage is absolutely huge. And then not only that, it lets us get that high damage because it gives us another link, right? Because it has implicit spell totem, you get an extra damage slot, and we take full advantage of that. And then the final thing it does is it makes your totems a lot tankier because they have 50% increased totem life. Now, previously, when this was like a level 15 spell totem, the totems actually were fairly weak because the level of the gem does definitely factor into how tanky the totems were. Because when I was doing this build in previous patches, or builds like the Freezing Pulse totem, you could actually notice that even in spite of the 50% increased totem life, the totems were quite squishy. And now that now that you get a level 20 spell totem, your totems are just super tanky. And they're already tanky because you're going Cheiftan Ascendancy, which means that they have Leech. And in addition to Leech, they have immunity to fire. And in addition to immunity to fire, you're running the minion and totem elemental resist gem. Where is it here? And which gives them essentially plus 44 to all resistances, effectively capping them on elemental resists. So your totems get super tanky by using this. It's just a great all-around chest, and it's really easy to mitigate the downside by just using 2 warding flasks. You can even just sub out a life flask here if you want your Quicksilver to have adrenaline on it, and use another flask with warding. So you can do a lot to change up the flask setup. I would definitely just recommend you get a Wise Oak because the damage is obviously absolutely absurd. And the next item we have here is the Taming. Now the Taming adds a lot of damage, but it's not really needed for the build. This is probably the most expensive item you're going to get, aside from getting a 6-link Soul Mantle, but the Taming is not needed at all. The build still functions really well without it, but it's a huge damage boost with it because you're adding more ignite chance, right? You're adding a little bit of elemental damage, but you're adding tons of increased damage per ignite stack on the enemy, and you're going to be igniting it a ton of times. So the damage in PoE Path of Building, rather, isn't even taking the taming into account because it doesn't have a way to calculate that yet. So I guess I'll just say the damage is huge by adding this ring, and you can really notice a difference on single target bosses. And the other thing we're adding is Winds of Change. This is basically for the projectile speed, and then the projectile damage double dips because this build uses Ignite. So projectile damage is amazing for this build because all of it essentially applies to the Ignite, which is where a lot of the damage is coming from, right? Then we're using these Gang's Momentum boots because of the 15% chance to ignite. And then you also get 39% increased damage against ignited enemies with this particular role. Gives a decent amount of fire resist. You don't have to use these, but they really help. Getting that ignite chance up just really increases your DPS. And then just a standard belt with lots of resists and a helmet. As you can see, I don't have an Incinerate helmet for this build. It's something that I should definitely get. The best one is probably the 24% damage per stage because you're not really going to need the extra prod speed because you already have a ton of prod speed, but if you're lacking on prod speed, feel free to grab that enchant instead. This is just, I use this because I wanted a fairly high ES helm, and I was having a hard time rolling one that had health and ES and the correct enchant on it. So, and speaking of that, the reason why you want a lot of ES is because basically found a way to do a tri-layer defense with this build, and we'll talk about this next, right? So, it doesn't have that much life, doesn't have a ton of ES, and doesn't have a ton of mana, but you are utilizing all of them in your defense. So basically, you can get probably around, you can get close to 5k life with better rolls in your gears. Obviously, you can see right now we're level 94 with 4700. So if you have like mediocre gear and you're kind of lower level, I would expect to cap out at like 4500. It's easier to get this amount of energy shield, I would say. Discipline adds a lot. It adds like 600 or something. And you can get decent ES gear for relatively cheap. And the reason why you want a bunch of ES is because if you look into the tree, we go Ghost Reaver. Now, this is essentially a hybrid build, and something my friend and I were trying to think of when we were building this is we want to be able to use the ES on our life because we're not going to have a ton of overall mitigation or a ton of overall effective health. So if we did the thing where we reserved all of our mana and we threw the energy shield on our mana and we got like Eldritch Battery and Mind Over Matter and did that, and the issue that we were going to run into is that we basically have 4.5k life and around 1500 ES, and that's not very tanky at all. So in order to make more use out of the Mind Over Matter, we decided to throw the energy shield on the life. And in order to make it useful, we allow it to basically be replenished by using Ghost Reaver, right? And then how does your health get replenished? Well, you have life regen in the build. So if you take chaos damage or something like that, your life is still regenning just via normal life regen. And then Mind Over Matter also helps with life regen, or also helps deal with chaos damage. And if your energy shield is completely depleted, then obviously your Mind Over Matter takes over. This is kind of a low mana value, and that's kind of because some of our gear isn't really that perfect, and we're using a lot of uniques. But basically, the neck and the helm could be a lot better, I would say, and even the wands in some cases could be better. And that would allow you to have basically more mana for Mind Over Matter, but this is a decent amount to get. Like, the idea here is you're not trying to mitigate a ton of damage with Mind Over Matter, mostly just like the chaos damage and stuff, right? And just to give you that little bit of extra defense whenever ES goes down. So that's kind of how the leeching mechanic works with this, and obviously you leech via this node right here in the Cheiftan. This is what gives you your leech. So I think that's pretty much it for the gear. You can use like other things in this slot. Like you can use a one of the, what is that thing called? The Cowrie Ward or whatever. But it's just another life roll lost, and we already have a ton of uniques in this build, some of them that don't give life, so it's kind of like you're getting to that point where you're really starting to sacrifice a ton of survivability when you start adding more and more uniques, so that's why I ended up just going with the regular amulet. Another gearing option I want to mention before going on to the tree and stuff is that you can use a Tukahama shield with this build. And I think I am going to get a Tukahama shield at one point and just kind of mess around with it. I don't have one right now since they're kind of expensive. And I just wanted to invest currency into other builds. But Tukahama shield would be really great because it gives you another totem, which is insane because it's more ignites, right? You lose the damage from the wand, which kind of sucks, but you do get 40% increased damage from the shield, which double dips on the ignite. So the damage loss is there, but you're getting a whole nother totem, and you're still getting the double dipping. You're getting a shield, which can allow you to block, and it gives you like 100 life, which is huge. And on top of that, if you're able to get a scepter, which I want to talk about scepters because scepters are the best weapons for this build because they have base elemental damage, right, which double dips. Wands are not as good because they have base spell damage, which only affects the initial hit, which then affects the ignite, but it doesn't actually scale the ignite, right? The only reason I'm using wands here is because I couldn't find like 2 really good scepters. But if you get the Tukahama shield, you only need 1 really good scepter and a Tukahama shield. And the scepter and the shield will also allow you to shield charge, so you'll have a better movement skill. The build basically just becomes a lot better and more fluid if you were to probably play it that way, but it also increases the currency required to play it, because then you're getting a Tukahama shield in addition to an Emberwake, or a Taming rather. And if you get a 6-link one of these, the cost can kind of start to go up. So wands are fine, but Tukahama shield, definitely a viable option here. You will lose some of the projectile speed, but right now I'm only running like 22% projectile speed between both wands, so it's not going to be a huge loss, and you'll still have plenty of projectile speed for trash with faster projectiles when you get into the links, so you should do that now. So basically for the links we're using control destruction, minion totem elemental resistance. Now this is gem is almost like perfect for this build because not only does it help with making your totems tankier, but the 19% more damage double dips because it's more elemental damage. So it affects your initial hit and your ignite. Fire penetration, pretty much self-explanatory, right? And then slower projectiles, incinerate, and faster casting. Now, you can do stuff like you could probably throw a Pierce gem in here somewhere that may give you some more DPS, so if you wanted to mess around with the colors. But this is a pretty solid coloring scenario, I think, and all these gems are pretty useful. And with that being said, let's go over some of the other things that the build uses, right? So it uses discipline, clarity. The clarity you can kind of play around with depending on if you have mana regen in your neck, if you want to get some mana regen jewels, or if you want to just get more mana regen from the tree. So you can use a lower or higher version of the clarity. Obviously max level discipline, giving us a lot of our ES, and then you use a lightning golem for the cast speed. Fire golem also not bad because it double dips, so you can kind of use either one there. I think the lightning golem still came out on top in the Sims though. So, and then we use a flammability, which is 2020, and the reason why 2020 is important is because flammability adds ignite chance, and ignite chance is something you want to constantly have in mind for this build. Other than that, we're just running cast on when damage taken, Vol Lightning Trap on the increased duration, Vol Haste on increased duration, and then you want to Orb of Storms to trigger your Elemental Overload and some type of movement skill. In this case, just using Lightning Warp. So that being said, let's get into the actual build here, right? Pretty self-explanatory with the Ascendancy. You want Flames Advance because of the Ignite chance and the additional burning or damage against burning enemies. You obviously want Death's Fury because of the leech, and then the taunt is amazing, and the fire immunity is really nice as well. And another thing about the Tukahama shield actually is that if the other passive on the shield is that you get armor basically for every totem you put down. So you'll have a decent amount of armor because you'll have like 4 totems, and then you also have like armor nodes from the tree and stuff that don't really impact this build too much because it doesn't have the shield. But if you were to have a Tukahama shield and you're putting down 4 totems and you're getting the armor from the shield itself, you're going to have probably a decent amount, I'd say at least like 3 to 4k armor. So 50% of that would go to your totems, which is huge, which makes this node even more effective essentially. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And then obviously you take 8% less damage here with 16% more fire damage, really good node. So the Ascendancy is pretty basic. As far as the tree goes, a little bit more complicated, but you're basically just looking for elemental damage, fire damage, totem damage, and then ignite chance. And all those things double dip. Ignite chance obviously doesn't double dip, but it gives you higher chance to get ignite on your target, which is obviously amazing. And then other than that, you're pretty much just getting life. And then obviously you want a rain of splinters because you want your Incinerate Totems to have obviously 3 projectile streams. So this is pretty much the optimal build. You can come down and get more life if you want. There's more totem damage nodes down here. A little bit more life over here, so you can kind of shift things around. Would definitely recommend getting this cluster up here. Make sure you get Elemental Overload, Mind Over Matter, Shamanistic Fury, a really good cluster. Celestial Punishment, this is a nice cluster. Pretty much these totem nodes are really good because they're very easily accessible. You're just looking for easily accessible things on your path that give you essentially double dipping damage. And oh wait, that's the other thing I want to mention with this is, and obviously to get Ghost Reaver, the jewels, right? We use a lot of jewels in this build, or a decent amount. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we use like 5 jewels, which is like a decent amount. One of them is Rain Splinters. The other one, you want Ignite Chance and Ignite Duration, right? That's going to be a huge DPS increase, and then you can pretty much just get whatever else after that. I like to get life on them, so pretty much I would search for increased life and then ignite, increased ignite duration, and increased ignite chance. And those are pretty much your core jewels. And that's pretty much the skill tree, as you can see. I'll post it in the description for anybody who didn't get the whole rundown there. But yeah, that's pretty much the build. The damage is really high in Path of Building. I think right now if I upload this character in, it's like 400 and some K ignite damage with like the totems dealing 100 and some K damage. And that's per totem. So yeah, we're in the millions of DPS for sure. And then that's not even counting things like Vol Lightning Trap. I think that is counted with Vol Haste though, and obviously your curse is up. Dual curse with this build, also great. You could run something like a vulnerability. You could even run a what is that flask called? It gives you the vuln and it's like a Stibnite flask. Witchfire Brew, yeah, it gives you the vuln and it also gives you damage over time. I think like up to 80% increased damage over time. So you could always do that with a +1 curse, but it's kind of hard to get a +1 curse unless you do it on like a carry ward or something, and then again you're sacrificing the life. So you could do a lot of things depending on how tanky you want it to get, right? You can obviously get more life in the tree and take away some of the damage nodes, and you'll still be fine. So if you're not really comfortable with this amount of health, you can push it to like, especially if you use the Tukahama shield, you can probably push it to like 5.5k life easily, switching some things around and losing some damage. 5.5k life, around 2k ES, and then a decent amount of mana. So there's a lot of things to play around with, and as far as the any other things, as far as we can go over anger. So why anger isn't in this build is because it doesn't really do that much to our ignite damage, and we could run it and not run Mind Over Matter, but I just feel like I'd rather have Mind Over Matter, so that's why we don't run anger. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. Any questions or comments, you can feel free to leave them in the description, and I will get back to them as soon as possible. And yeah, I'll post some demonstrations of the build and should be good to go. So if you like this build or the guide, feel free to like and subscribe. And thank you for watching, and hope to see you guys next time.